From 2Keto LLC, it's the Obesity Code podcast with Dr. Jason Fung and Megan Ramos. Each week, we bring you lessons and stories from the Intensive Dietary Management Program in Toronto, Canada. I'm Carl Franklin. And on the show today, live Q&A with Megan Ramos. The Obesity Code podcast is brought to you by 2Keto LLC, who strives to support the low-carb community with podcasts and other publications. Today's show is a Q&A session recorded live with myself and Richard Morris, and answering your questions today, none other than Megan Ramos. Hi, Megan.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Pretty good.
We're actually both in New London, which is awesome.
Richard's here at Keto Fest Central this week.
Yeah.
We have questions and answers today, Megan, and let's start with some of yours. You obviously get a lot of questions on social media, and sometimes they warrant sharing with the wider audience.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that's coming up with the patients that I work with nowadays has a lot to do with social media. So this might not necessarily be a question, but it's about social media and all these fasting Facebook groups is becoming a really hot topic in my clinic. And it's becoming a hot topic in my clinic because nowadays everyone's trying to do these really long fasts.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with doing a long fast. But everyone has sort of the mentality that if something is good for you, then a whole lot of it must be great for you.
Right.
So if one day fast is awesome and can help you lose, a pound of body fat and can knock your blood sugar levels down, then doing 10 days of fasting must be 10 times better for you.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case. So when Jason and I first started IDM, we had a lot of scrutiny. A lot of people are watching us in terms of our colleagues. So we just kept things to intermittent fasting just to play it safe.
Yeah.
We couldn't hospitalize our patients. We had to only check in with them once a week. So we did the intermittent fasting. So one day on, one day off, one day on, one day off. And we just really preached at our patients about the importance of consistency. And within about 6 weeks, all of our diabetic patients were off a diabetic medication, whether it was metformin or whether it was 110 units of insulin.
Right.
And that was just from intermittent fasting, but just being consistent with it. So back in 2005, when Jason and I started IDM, fasting really wasn't that trendy. The ketogenic diet was starting to become more trendy. Low carbohydrate diets in general were becoming very trendy, but not fasting. So fasting's really sort of taken the world over by storm. Even when I was in the States over the December holidays, all of the morning talk shows were talking about time-restricted eating being the new diet of 2018. So it's become huge. So eventually Jason and I got into fasting some of our patients for prolonged periods of time, meaning 7 days, 14 days. The odd time we would recommend a 21-day fast. And of course, we were heavily monitoring these individuals.
Oh, yeah.
But it was about a year after we started IDM where we asked anyone to do anything beyond a 36-hour fast. So we had a lot of success with intermittent fasting before we did the longer fasts. And usually the longer fasts, we only ask someone who is literally almost at the end of their rope, in terms of if you don't get off your insulin now and get your blood sugar levels better now, you're going to lose your foot in 2 months.
Yeah.
And so more extreme cases. And then we had a lot of success with those patients. So then we started doing longer fasts with those who it just seemed like the longer fast would fit better into their lifestyles. But then social media, fasting became super trendy on social media. And now every time I go on to one of these Facebook groups, even our own Facebook groups, we have 2 Facebook groups, and everyone's talking about 7-day fasts and 10-day fasts. And a lot of people give our moderators flack on Facebook because we say you can only talk about 7-day fasts. You can't talk about fasting beyond 7 days. And a big reason for that is it's not necessarily a legal or a safety reason why we cap it, is because we don't want to help fuel the fire we don't want to fuel the fire, because if something is good for you, too much of it is bad for you. And that's the same thing with everything in life. Water is vital for our survival.
Don't drown in it.
You can drown in it. So too much of it's bad. So we didn't want our patients to feel pressured, because this is just society's mentality. So instead of the masses just trying to do a few days of fasting, what fits into their lifestyle, the masses are going to gravitate to trying to do more and more. More is always better in the North American mentality anyways.
I think people tend to try and one-up each other. You know, one person says, I can do 5 days, and the next person says, well, I'm going to try 6 days. And it escalates.
And that makes people feel bad who can't get beyond 48 hours and maybe don't even need to.
So that's a big issue, and that's the exact issue that myself, as well as the rest of the IDM team, is facing right now, is that doing 7-day fasts all the time just is not practical for people. I can finagle a 7-day fast about 2 to 4 times a year, without it really infringing on my life. If I needed to for my survival, I absolutely would do it more often. But usually there's not that necessity to do it. And if people that I work with, they're constantly putting pressure on themselves to try to do a 7-day fast, but they physically can't do it, or they just socially can't really fit it into their lifestyle. So they never do it. They get to day 1. Something comes up, maybe by day 2, they don't feel well, and that they call it quits, and then they beat themselves up for 3 weeks before they try to fast again. And at the end of the year, they're fasting maybe 2 days a month after 12 months, and they've gotten absolutely nowhere at the end of the year because they keep trying to do these longer fasts. And it's really discouraging for them to go online and see these people who are always doing these longer fasts. So we were talking a lot about this in clinic, and just sort of reinforcing that it's all about consistency and what you can do consistently. Jason and I have so many patients in clinic. These guys might see us every 6 to 8 weeks, and they don't do anything in those 6 to 8 weeks except for the week before they see us. It's like they look at the calendar and say, oh no, I'm seeing those fasting guys next week. Well, I better fast until I see them. And at the end of the year, they do like 4 7-day fasts, which is great. And, their blood sugar levels might drop a bit. They might have lost a couple of pounds. But in a lot of the cases, that doesn't even happen. Their blood sugar levels stay the same or go up, or they gain weight because they're not doing anything the rest of the year. If you got 52 weeks of the year and you're only fasting 4 weeks of those 52 weeks, that's a whole lot of not doing anything. So consistency is important with the intermittent fasting, and people need to do what works for them and what they can do consistently. And Jason and I have always been big on the number 3. Through all of our experimentation, when we first started IDM, we found 3 fasting days a week generated consistent success with people. Most of our patients, again, doing it 3 days a week, were off of their diabetic meds within about 6 to 8 weeks.
And were those 3 days all in a row, or 24 hours at a time, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter, but 3 days we found has been a really good balance. So whether people want to fast Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, or they want to do 3 days back to back, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it doesn't matter, but it still allows for a good fasting life balance.
That's the pattern Julie and I sort of settled on. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was what we ended up doing, and we found that we could keep that up for quite a good time, and both of us it did remarkable things for.
I think doing it is 3 days of the week is a really great balance between fasting enough to get the therapeutic benefits of fasting and still being able to live your life. Right. So fasting isn't infringing on your life too much. And it's just as important to eat as it is to fast.
Right.
It's just important to eat well. And I feel like there are so many people out there on social media and they're just afraid to eat almost. And you shouldn't be afraid to eat.
So the takeaway is just stop consulting Dr. Facebook, right?
Absolutely.
Turn it off. Do your own thing.
Don't compare your mess backstage with everybody else's front of house.
Absolutely. We're talking to patients. I had 3 in one group last week, and they were all in the same boat. And they said, we don't want to remove ourselves from these Facebook groups because there are things in there that do help us, or there are times where we're feeling stronger and we can handle seeing someone just complete a 7-day fast. So I just told them, you can turn off your notifications. I get added to so many groups. Jason and I discovered last week that we have both been added to like a low carb Bitcoin group. Like people add me to people add us to all these groups. Like Jason and was going through it and he said, do you know you're a member too? And I started to laugh and I said, no, I don't. So I turn off notifications for a lot of these groups, or I would get 1,000 notifications every hour. So that way, when I want to go into a group and focus on what's going on in that group, I actually can without being bombarded and overwhelmed by what's going on. And so that I got an email actually today from one of the people I spoke to on Tuesday morning, and she said she turned off notifications, but this week when she was feeling confident about what she was doing, when she was feeling good about her fasting, she was able to check in with the Facebook community online and get some information that she needed or some motivation to keep doing as well as she's been doing this week and to keep her motivated. So it works. So just simply turning off your notifications for these groups. You don't have to leave the group. You can just turn off your notifications for these groups.
Well, Megan, we've got a few more questions for you, and Richard's got one right now from the forum.
So I've got a question from the Ketogenic Forum, and this comes from a person asking, my question is regarding metabolism and fasting. If metabolism or BMR increases due to fasting, how long will this increase be maintained? Is it indefinite, barring any recurrence of bad eating habits, or just temporary? And if temporary, then how long can one expect their BMR to remain elevated?
Great question.
That is a good question. And I think we do need a little bit more data on that. But from what we've seen in our clinic and from the research that's available out there, as long as you maintain good eating patterns and you don't revert to sort of old low calorie, one sort of quick low fat meal a day, right, then you should be able to see the basal metabolic rate maintain. My basal metabolic rate when I started fasting was just below 800. Now it's just over 1200. Keep in mind I'm 5 feet tall and I'm 110 pounds. So yeah. I'm a small person. So that's pretty good. But the biggest issue that we see with people, and even when I've seen my own dips in metabolic rate, is when I'm just not eating enough on my eating days. So in order to be able to keep that boost in metabolic rate, it's important to make sure that you're eating fat on your eating days. It's really easy to cut out the carbs, but it's not always very easy to sub in the fat, and you need that fat because the fat's really calorie dense.
Sure.
So you need to have that fat. So the biggest issue that people struggle with this is just not adding enough fat. I started making a rule for myself and for our patients. Most women, I would ask them to take sort of somewhere between 3 to 5 tablespoons of fat, and men somewhere between about 5 to 8 tablespoons of fat per meal.
Yeah.
So people had a target because it's really easy to eat vegetables and to eat a chicken thigh, but that alone doesn't have enough fat in it. If you got a handful of roast roasted asparagus and you've got a couple of chicken thighs, it's not a tremendous amount of fat. You need to add butter. You need to add oil.
Throw some herbed butter on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So keep the fat high. And when we have some people who we constantly check their metabolic rate in, it's for those people who go down to one meal a day and get stuck there. That's where we don't see too much of an improvement in their metabolic rate. So if you want to sort of boost your metabolic rate and continue to boost your metabolic rate, you have to do sort of true intermittent fasting or shorter bursts of fasts, and occasionally do a longer period of fasting, but you need to keep your fat up. So we usually see the metabolic rate start to trend downwards when people start to go towards OMAD, 1 meal a day, and when they get really skimpy with the fat. And I'll get these patients' results in and before I see them. And one of the first questions I'll say, are you feeling satiated after you eat? And they say no. And the fasting's becoming more and more difficult. And then I ask them if they think they're eating enough fat. They almost always say no. And we talk about their diet and they're really not getting enough fat in.
Yeah.
So the most important thing to be able to maintain it is to fast consistently, vary your fasts, and keep your fat intake high.
Well, this is a follow-up question, and it happens to be right on the tails of this one, right? So if, let me just read the question. I would like to ask if it's correct that a fat fast gives exactly the same benefits to insulin levels as a water fast. The reason is, after reading Dr. Fung's blog posts about incretin and protein intake, I went hunting for incretin response to pure fat intake and found this study. And we'll post a link to it. It's called Incretin and Islet Hormonal Responses to Fat and Protein Ingestion in Healthy Men, Carr et al., 2008. This study found that there is an insulin response to a pure fat meal of low magnitude but prolonged duration, significantly different to the control group which just drank water. I would like to hear your views on the study. Is the rise in insulin low enough to be irrelevant, or should we be concerned that pure fat intake, a fat fast, will be less effective in the reversal of insulin resistance than a water fast?
So we do have a lot of patients fat fasts in our clinic, but we don't use the fat fast necessarily for weight loss. We do see a reduction in people's blood sugar levels when they do a fat fast, but we don't get the same results in terms of lowering the sugar levels enough to start removing medications. Initially we do, and then it sort of plateaus and levels off. So we use a fat fast in our clinic, or in our program, to help get people's appetite under control. There's a few instances where we use a fat fast, but that's the primary one. Secondary one is to help replenish lost electrolytes after a period of carb loading. So on Easter weekend, someone carb loaded and they stepped on the scale and the scale went up 10 pounds. Well, there's no way they gained 10 pounds of fat in one weekend. 90% of that's water. So on Monday, if they were to fast after Easter Sunday, well, they're going to lose a ton of water. Even if they go low carb on Monday, they're going to lose a ton of water. When they're in a fasted state, if they're not effectively replenishing their electrolytes, which a lot of people are very poor at, so a lot of people forget that they should take salt or forget that they should take magnesium. Sure. When they fast, they can really feel like garbage. So we usually encourage our patients to avoid fasting right off the bat after a period of bad eating or a day of really bad eating where they've retained a lot of water. So we'll have them do a fat fast on that day rather than a water fast or a water, tea, and coffee sort of fast.
Right.
Just so at least that they're going to be replenishing electrolytes, and that's guaranteed with a fat fast. The first time we ever used it in our clinic was with a 34-year-old male patient who I'm assuming he was born, with insulin resistance, like a pablum cornstarch fed baby from the start. And he came into our clinic, and his sister's a doctor, and she's the one that really pushed him to come. And he had been on insulin for type 2 diabetes since he was 21.
Wow.
And he's like, I work like night shift at this factory. I'm surrounded by food. He says, honestly, my whole life, he's like, I've only eaten, junk, especially his whole adult life. And he's like, I've eaten every 2 hours. And he was starting to go blind. He was starting to have kidney failure. He had fatty liver. And he said he was just so miserable. And so this guy, I had him do a fat fast because I was getting desperate. And I was like, yeah, we'll just eat bacon, eggs, olives, avocados. We'll just eat that. And I said, my mentality was at that point, I'm like, well, he's going to drop his blood sugar level some. We're going to be able to take him off some of his insulin. He'll lose some water weight. Hopefully those results will motivate him and propel him to want to fast and actually fast. If I can get him to see some short-term results, maybe I can get him to fast so we can get some good long-term results. But the next time I saw him in clinic, he was on day 4 of a fast, like where he was just consuming water, tea, and coffee and some chicken stock. And he said, I can't believe it. He's like, but I was so full. So fat is definitely the most satiating of the macronutrients. Yeah. Fat doesn't physically make your stomach expand in order for your brain to receive the signal that you're becoming satiated. Right. Fat doesn't have that expansion property. So when you eat protein, when you eat carbohydrates, you have to rely on your belly expanding in order to send a message to your brain that you're starting to fill up. Yeah. So to reduce the hunger. But fat doesn't have that. But fat, it has a very quick response in terms of when you digest it, it's shooting a message to your brain saying, hey, shut off Megan's appetite. She's getting lots and lots of energy, lots and lots of food. So turn it off now.
Is that a leptin response?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very strong leptin response. So fat, we use fat fasting just to help boost people into fasting. We have some people with mild insulin resistance. Their hemoglobin A1Cs are like 5.6, 5.7. We know they're sort of entering into that clinically diagnosed borderline diabetic range, but they're already starting to experience diabetic kidney damage and they're having problems with their eyes and nerve pain. So we see people in that realm. They're not too overweight, maybe 20, 30 extra pounds. And they might be leery of fasting. So we'll have them fat fast. And with those guys, their insulin resistance isn't that severe. So we get pretty good results. We can knock down their A1C to 5. We can get them to lose that 20 or 30 pounds with fat fasting. But for our patients with high insulin resistance or severe insulin resistance, it takes pretty strict water fasting. Even people sometimes simply having a few cups of broth a day doesn't work at all. Like that's enough protein, it's enough fat to really halt someone's progress. So for our more sick patients, water fasting is really what is going to do it, or at least water, tea, coffee, and some soup stock or chicken stock or any sort of stock.
I have a question now, also from my Ketogenic Forum. This one is about Keto Rash. And this question is, a person is asking, is it a hormonal thing? I have a case of it around my eyes, so it's pretty difficult to hide it. I love being in ketosis, but this part sucks. I've had keto rash for around 2 months on my lower back. It's very itchy. However, it is consistently, very slowly dissipating. It's almost gone now. I'll be happy when it is. So the question really is, what is keto rash?
Well, keto rash, so it's sort of a reaction with your skin and the ketones that are being produced by the body. But I personally think it has a lot to do with yeast. So this is how we started treating it in our clinic. We started treating people topically and with raw and filtered apple cider vinegar, and we had them ingest it orally as well. And this seemed to eliminate, like, someone who, I had this one woman, she had keto rash, she said, for about 2 weeks. It was almost unbearable. She was ready to give up. on fasting and on her low carbohydrate diet, and she just cried and she wanted to go eat some French fries and put herself out of her misery.
Oh, it's terrible.
So what we do with these patients is we have them take a cup of berries, raspberries, strawberries, blackberries. We tend to shy away from blueberries, but we have them take.
Now, why? That's curious.
Why?
Yeah.
Blueberries have twice the amount of sugar per equal volume compared to raspberries, strawberries, and blackberries.
Okay.
That's good to know.
So they've got they're not that bad, but they still have a lot more sugar than their other berry counterparts. So we increase their sugar intake a little bit because just the shock to the body from usually these people go from very high carb to ketogenic almost overnight. And that's where we see the most case of this keto rash. And we have them take 6 tablespoons of raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar diluted in water throughout the day. Not all at once, but 2 tablespoons at a time, 3 times a day. And we'll have them dilute raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar with water, equal parts, and then put that on the rash topically once or twice a day. Usually within 3 days, it's completely gone.
Wow.
We have them keep up 1 cup of berries for 1 week, and then we cut it back to half a cup of berries for 1 week, and then we ask them to just eliminate the berries on the 3rd week. And it works every time. So I think the raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar, I mean, that just eradicates all of the candida in the gut.
It's kind of magic, isn't it?
Yeah. So we think it really helps with that. Killing off candida that might be causing sort of the irritation in combination with the ketones.
Okay, I have another one. This is also from the ketogenic forums. And this person says, I prefer the results I get from extended fasts, 5 days or more. So that's what I do. But I'm also very concerned about the potential for refeeding syndrome, which is the sudden relocation of phosphorus in the body when you resume eating. I've been 100% keto since the last week of May 2017, and I'm an experienced EFer, extended faster. Because of my concern, I had to wait. It took me a second. EFer. Okay.
Effer.
Because of my concern about refeeding syndrome, I've always eaten a very small amount of high phosphorus food every 5 to 7 days of an extended fast, hoping to gently restore phosphorus and maybe avoid the great bodily shock of refeeding syndrome when I finally end it. I take in proper amounts of sea salt, potassium, and magnesium every day, whether I'm fasting or not. I should also mention that I'm recovering from a massive and near-fatal stroke from December 2016 before keto, so I try to avoid any kind of major shocks to my system, and I really like the potential healing effects of extended fasting. My question is, does it help to actually eat this small amount of high phosphorus food every few days of an extended fast, or does it just result in throwing me out of my fast every few days and have no effect on mitigating any potential refeeding syndrome? Thanks so much for everything that you do.
Well, refeeding syndromes, it was a hot topic for me in March after Breckenridge.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
There's a theme of Breckenridge. Really, refeeding syndrome is something that only people who are quite malnourished need to be concerned about. Also, for people who are doing tremendously long extended fasts. But even then, what is his name? I don't know why I'm forgetting his name right now. That crazy guy who fasted for over 380
Angus Barbieri,
yeah.
There he goes. I'm brain dead at this time of night. He had vitamin infusions periodically, but his phosphorus levels stayed incredibly stable.
Yeah.
His phosphorus, his calcium, his magnesium, everything stayed very stable. And he was not a malnourished guy, that's for sure.
He may have just been an outlier. That's the thing.
He could have been.
He's the only guy who we've got records for fasting for that long.
It's true.
Yeah, according to the story, he took supplements that provided potassium, sodium, and yeast, and only drank non-caloric fluids, water, coffee, and tea.
So people who are at risk for refeeding syndrome, it is possible to have certain conditions that throw off your phosphorus levels. So things like kidney disease can have a dramatic impact on your phosphorus levels, either too high or too low. So it's good to make sure you have a baseline lab assessment done to see if there's any minerals that you are deficient in to start with. All these minerals like to be in balance: calcium, phosphorus, magnesium. So if one of them goes out the window, the other ones start to act up and not be quite in balance. So it's always good to have baseline blood work done to make sure that you're not at high risk before you start fasting. In terms of wanting to be extra cautious and prevent refeeding syndrome, usually people who have excess body fat and who do eat well, when they do eat and they're not fasting for weeks on end, usually they're not at high risk for refeeding syndrome if there's no reason why their minerals are thrown off, like they don't have kidney disease or their kidney disease isn't interfering with their phosphorus levels yet anyways. But we do recommend to some of our patients who do have issues with phosphorus levels or other important minerals, calcium and magnesium, we do recommend that they take broth. Now, they don't have to drink an excessive amount of broth, but taking something like chicken broth, chicken bone broth, every day, 1 cup of it every day during their fast or every couple of days. And usually that is what I would recommend to be a good alternative to rather than breaking your fast and taking a meal rich in high phosphorus foods and then getting back on your fast. If you find that extended fasting is something that you can keep up with on a more consistent basis and gets you the results that you want, and it's just easier for you to do, I would have, a cup of bone broth every day or a couple of cups of bone broth every 2 or 3 days throughout the extended fast to make sure you're getting in all the phosphorus, calcium, magnesium that you need to help prevent refeeding syndrome.
Yeah. How about the first meal back after a fast? What would you recommend to minimize the chance of refeeding syndrome?
So for the first meal after the fast, it's important not to put sort of too much of a load on the body. We have our patients usually break their fast with a cup of water with a tablespoon or 2 of chia seeds or psyllium husks.
Chia seeds. Wow.
Chia seeds or psyllium husks. So if you break your fast at 5 p.m., at 4:30, so half an hour before, take a cup of water, about 8 to 16 ounces of water, mix in 1 to 2 tablespoons of either the chia seeds or the psyllium husk, let it sit for 30 minutes, and then drink that at 5 o'clock to break your fast.
Is that just to get something non-nutritional and bulky in your stomach?
Yes, it is. And it will also, though, kickstart digestive juices flowing.
Okay.
And get your digestive system revved up again after a period of being slightly dormant for a few days.
I heard a handful of nuts was good, too. Is psyllium husk better than nuts?
Psyllium husk is better than nuts. So Jason and I, this was a bad edit that made it through the complete guide to fasting. It was supposed to be what not to break your fast with is nuts.
Okay.
And it got put into what to break your fast with. Most people get extremely nauseous. Nuts are terribly difficult on anyone's digestive system to break down. But most people want to gravitate towards nuts because most of them are very high in phosphorus. So people who are very concerned about refeeding syndrome, they're like, well, I'll get this phosphorus load with this handful of almonds. Yeah. But then their body can't digest it because the digestive juices aren't there, and they end up causing nausea, extreme nausea. So we usually ask for people to hold off for nuts for the first 12 hours after they've broken an extended fast.
Interesting.
Most people who do intermittent fasting don't need to be too concerned, but for extended fasts, it's too tough on your digestive tract. The one sort of substitution that you could make, if you wanted to break your fast with nuts, is to have sprouted nuts. They're much easier on your digestive system to digest.
So basically growing them in a jar with a bit of water till they have sprouts coming out of them?
Yes. So if you really wanted to get a hit of phosphorus right away, then sprout your nuts before. but if you think that you're going to get that,
and I think we have a show title.
Sprout your nuts.
Exactly.
But you don't. If you just take the handful of almonds or walnuts, chances are you're going to throw it up. So much for all that phosphorus.
Yeah.
So gently wake up your digestive system about half an hour, 15 minutes to 30 minutes after you drink the fiber in the water. Then having a salad with a little bit of olive oil on it. We usually ask too that people shy away from MCT oil and coconut oil.
Oh yeah, that's just asking for it.
It is. So yeah, everything you put in is going to go out, and you want your body to try to retain as many of those vital nutrients like phosphorus when you start eating again. Okay. So you want to do it slow and gradually.
Well, here's another one from the ketogenic forums. I've heard how you should test blood, not urine or breath, for ketones. The common issue I hear on the urine ketone testing is that it becomes inaccurate after you've been in keto for a few weeks. But what if it doesn't? I started keto about 6 weeks ago, and during that time, I've been testing urine ketones mostly daily or every other day in the early evening, about 6 p.m. At the end of the first week, they were up in the dark purple range, labeled as 80 to 160 milligrams per deciliter. Since then, they have consistently been in the pink or light purple range, which is 15 to 40. Why haven't mine disappeared? Am I not keto fat adapting properly? Is my body not using ketones efficiently?
So what my clinical experience with this is, and my personal experience with this is, when I was actively trying to lose body fat and had a surplus of it to burn, and I was doing quite intensive fasting and being really strict with my keto diet, I started off with next to no blood ketones and dark, super purple urine stick readings from my keto sticks. And eventually, over time, I transitioned into high blood ketone readings, but I would read low on the keto sticks when I checked my urine, but it would never be negative. And once I got to the point where I stopped burning body fat and I was sort of trying to maintain my weight, and I would be fasting and not burning body fat. I would fast for the growth hormone production to build bone and to put on lean muscle mass. But I wasn't fasting to necessarily burn body fat. That's when I found that my urine ketones went to nothing. So when I'm working with a patient too, and we're trying to figure out, sort of their sweet spots for everything. Yeah. If they have high blood ketones and no urine ketones, but they have a surplus of body fat, if they're usually not losing a whole lot of body fat with whatever they're doing in terms of their diet. Maybe they're taking way too much fat. So they're just eating fat for the heck of it, even when they're not hungry.
Yeah, way past satiation.
Yeah, maybe they're not fasting enough. But usually I find the sort of sweet spot for body when you're actually losing body fat is you still will have some ketone output in your urine. Just because you're losing body fat, you're burning through so much, you're producing through so much ketones that at a cellular level, you don't need that many ketones. So you're wasting them through your urine. That's sort of the hypothesis that we have at IDM.
Richard, is acetoacetate one of the first ketone bodies that you produce when you go into ketosis?
It's actually the first ketone body that we make in the process of spilling fat that we can't use. We make acetoacetate, and then we turn that into beta-hydroxybutyrate to make it shelf-stable, because acetoacetate naturally degrades into acetone, which we can't use for energy. It's no longer a ketone body as such that we can use for energy. We really just outgas it.
So ultimately, this is what happens. You measure less acetoacetate with the urine strips and more beta-hydroxybutyrate that's floating in your bloodstream with a blood ketone meter.
Yes, I think that would make sense. So the last question, Megan, is about 1 meal a day, which is a common pattern. It's something I've sort of fallen into. And the question really is, why does it work for some people and not for others?
Well, so there's a lot of these guys that post about their 1 meal a day online. I work with a lot of them. They're patients in the IDM program.
Yeah.
And they fit we have two typical patient profiles in our program. We have the patient profile of a person who's never really tried to lose weight. They've never cared that they've been overweight. Not at all. Their entire life. It's never stopped them from going to supersize their French fries or supersize their soda drinks. They just haven't cared. They're proud to love every inch of their being, and they're happy with that. But then as they get older, they start to experience complications of their obesity. They start to develop things like diabetes. They require insulin injections. People start talking about them having to have bypass surgery, all these very scary terms that they don't want to have to deal with. Right. So if they have to lose weight, then they're happy to lose weight. So these people they've been overweight for a long period of time. They're eating tons of food all of the time, and their bodies are trying to shed that weight. So they have these really high basal metabolic rates because their body's actively trying to lose weight, and these people are just sort of out eating their body. They just keep going and going and going for more food.
Right.
So these guys, when they start fasting and they get into a 1 meal a day cycle, they have very, very high metabolic rates. They have dangerously high metabolic rates almost. And their metabolic rate's so high and trying to lose that weight so much, it's burning out their metabolic processes. It's increasing their aging because it's running so high to lose this weight. So for these people, they actually want to see their metabolic rate come down because they don't want to burn out their bodies. You don't want to have a really low metabolic rate, but you don't want to have a really high metabolic rate either. It's not good for longevity. You want to preserve your metabolic processes. Yeah.
So what would be a high metabolic rate?
Well, it depends if you're male or female and your body size and structure. Like I'm 5 feet tall and 110 pounds. My metabolic rate's about 1,200.
Mine's about 2,900.
Yeah, but there are people out there with metabolic rates like well over 4,000 or 5,000 because they're so obese.
How does one measure that?
So you can go to a physiology lab in Toronto at various metabolic clinics in Toronto, not at our clinic, but we can refer patients to them. They have these fancy physiological devices and they hook a bunch of electrodes up to you, and you have to be in a fasted state to have this assessed, and you lie there and they hook you up with all these electrodes, and it generates some metabolic rate. So the easiest way to have your resting metabolic rate tested anyways is to have a DEXA scan done. They cost anywhere from $60 to about $120, and they can give you your resting metabolic rate in about 30 seconds from just lying there. I'm not quite sure how they do it.
Wow, that's incredible.
I think they guess from how much lean mass you have and how much fat mass you have, and there's a formula involved. I know that you can do a gas exchange, and you can determine not only where somebody's getting their energy from, but what their metabolic rate is and how efficient their mitochondria are.
Is that the respiratory quotient?
Well, the respiratory quotient tells you what people are using for energy, but then how much oxygen they breathe in and then how much they breathe out determines how well their mitochondria are working. And that's how they worked out my metabolic rate, which is 2,900. I've got 80 kilograms of lean mass, so I'm using a lot of energy, but I thought that was quite a high metabolic rate, but 4,000 is just incredible.
That's insane, yeah.
That's where you see people that have like a surplus, like they're 400, 500 pounds. So there are people with very, very high metabolic rates.
Well, Megan, thank you very much for spending this time with us and answering these questions. And I'm sorry Dr. Fung couldn't be here with you, but he's a very busy guy. But we'll have you both on very soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Well, take care, guys. And
thanks,
happy feasting and happy fasting.
Absolutely. Thanks, Megan.
And that's our show for this week. You've been listening to the Obesity Code podcast, lessons and stories from the Intensive Dietary Management Program. The Obesity Code podcast is brought to you by 2Keto LLC, who strives to support the low-carb community with podcasts and other publications. And you can support our mission by making a monthly pledge, no matter how small, at patreon.2keto.com. I'm Carl Franklin. We'll see you next time.